So there are different difficulties experienced by different individual SEND profiles when it comes to revision skills. And these are just some that I came up with. So we've mentioned issues with working memory is one. Organisation of work and revision is another. The processing of information, so taking in the information, synthesizing it, understanding it, and then getting it into your working memory, but then your long-term memory as well, because memory recall, really, ideally you want it to be in the long-term memory. That's when it stays there. Getting ideas and words onto paper is a very common one, not knowing how to start, and often a level of distraction or a lack of focus is an issue. The first one is, so issues with working memory is a common problem with pupils who have dyslexia. Organising work or revision or sequencing activities and thinking it through is quite often an issue with dyslexia, although often pupils with dyslexia can have a really good creative overview and logical thought process. So some of this isn't always the case, but often it can be. Processing of information can be a dyslexic trait. And it can also be a trait of dysgraphia. So processing information, then getting words onto paper and explaining yourself in the written form would be an issue relative to dysgraphia. And then getting ideas and words onto paper can be related to autism spectrum. So I'm not able to visualize how a scene might look and what, of which one of my 5 senses I should think about and what potentially could be happening in that situation for my English paper, my creative writing task. Therefore, I find it difficult to get my ideas and words onto paper. That's definitely a thing. That, again, is an issue with pupils with dysgraphia. That is fundamentally a difficulty with expressing oneself in writing. And then getting ideas and words onto paper can be a dyspraxic trait as well, because it could be just in terms of the fine motor skills. Actually, I can't write quickly because I have difficulty with my fine motor skills, and therefore that prevents me from getting my words onto paper because I can't physically write quickly enough. And that's where we would be looking at support such as a word processor or laptop. And then a level of distraction and lack of focus is usually obviously ADHD or ADD, but also a lack of focus can be because of an unmotivated mood, or finding something difficult, or constantly having to battle against whatever the difficulty is, or the environment isn't right. There can be so many reasons for a lack of focus. So we're going to talk about that as well in a bit more detail. The term comorbidity, obviously, just to refresh, if you didn't, I'm sure you do know, but just in case you didn't, if somebody has comorbidity, that is a kind of dual diagnosis of something. So somebody, it's not black and white. So for example, I think probably have a bit of ADHD. Whether or not I would actually get a diagnosis, I don't know, but I've got a lot of traits of ADHD. Now, there's nothing stopping me. I'm not just going to have ADHD. My brain is not that discrete. It's not necessarily going to work like that. I might have some traits of dyslexia and some traits of ADHD. I might have autism and I might have ADHD. There is absolutely, you could have everything. There is absolutely no fine, black and white system that will say you only have this or you only have that. And that's what's difficult. Actually, the most complex pupils to support, in my opinion, are the pupils that have multiple difficulties. So a pupil that has dyslexia and ADHD is more difficult to support than a pupil just with dyslexia, for example, because there's more support that needs to be put in place. So the more comorbidity there is between sort of challenges, the more difficult it is to support the pupil, but it's definitely possible. You just got to be aware. And there will usually be a primary diagnosis with traits of something else, but there can be 2 diagnoses as well. So back over to you. So what do you perceive or observe that are helpful strategies that you've used to support your pupils when you've tried to help them revise in the past? So was there anything, or did everything fail? Fine, that's not an issue. That's why we're here. But what have you tried that has worked in the past when you've tried to help a pupil revise? And if you haven't ever tried, that's fine. Just say that. And I'm just going to come out of here. And I am just going to stop sharing for a second. So what have you tried? Okay, let's just have a look at the chat. Good. So Lucy says she sat with her son who has a dyslexia diagnosis and all of those apply to him. Yeah, they're very common. That's not unusual. We've got someone else there with a son who's saying all of those apply to your son. Yeah, good. Anybody else? So any strategies that have worked in the past, while I'm just waiting in the chat, if there's anything that you think, okay, not experienced, this is your key stage 1 base. That's fine. Jill says, yeah, breaking down a topic by writing out key questions. Yeah, good. Rachel says, mind maps, linking revision to movement, making up songs and rhymes. Rachel, you're spoiling my presentation. That's very good. Audios help with revision. Good. Lucy, that's brill. Acronyms, Maria, yeah, great. Revision timetable, brilliant. So there are some things that you found that do work, and we're going to go into more detail about what those are in a minute. So all of those apply, but that's really good feedback. Okay, let me go back to screen share. Okay, so how can we support our pupils? So full disclosure, this is just my creation. You may get to the end and think, well, not sure about that. Fine, that's completely fine. This is the way that I work. I think it works well. Pupils seem to get it, and I'll be interested to see what you think. It seems to be effective with the pupils I work with privately and whatever else. It works for me. It may not work for you, but I'm going to just show you what I mean anyway. So I believe that revision should be set up as a 3-stage process, and I'll go into more detail about that in a minute. There's a variety of reasons for that. Firstly, you've talked about, they need to understand what to revise. Well, there needs to be a framework, in my opinion, for doing the revision. It needs to be revision that is logical. They need to be able to have a visual framing of topics. So they need to be able to see how it works. Because if a child struggles with, say, auditory memory or auditory processing or visual processing, so taking on information through the eyes and then turning it and synthesizing it into their brain, and the same with auditory through the ears. If a child has everybody has a preference for learning a certain way. I learn best by doing something. Most people do. But if I can see somebody do it, hear what they're talking about, and then try it, I'm likely to do better. So that sort of multisensory approach is really key. So being able to visually imagine a topic or hear it and sing it and all those things will be really effective, more effective than just reading it. And they need support with organisation, which assists with recalling of information. So I'll go into that in more detail. Revision sessions should always end with a product. That is one of the key messages that I'm going to talk you through today. And we need to use a variety of revision mechanisms to support learning and recall. Now, a revision mechanism is quite hard to say. Revision mechanism. There are lots of different mechanisms you could use. I also call that a recall trigger. So what is the trigger that gets you to recall a bit of information? So you'll hear me mention recall trigger or revision mechanism. But it needs to be a 3-phase approach. And there's a pre-phase, which I'll go into now as well.